Welcome. Good afternoon. It is my honor to welcome you to this year's National Symposium for Classical Education, focusing on cultivating a sense of wonder. I can think of no better scholar to speak on the subject than my friend and former professor at Yale, Dr. Junius Johnson. Junius is a writer, teacher, speaker, independent scholar, and musician. His work focuses on beauty, imagination, and wonder, and how these are at play in the Christian and classical intellectual traditions. He is the executive director of Junius Johnson Academics, through which he offers innovative classes for both children and adults that aim to ignite student hearts with wonder and intellectual rigor. An avid devotee of story, he is especially drawn to fantasy, science fiction, and young adult fiction. He performs professionally on the French horn and electric bass. He holds a BA from Oral Roberts University, an MAR from Yale Divinity School, and an MA, 2 MPhils, and a PhD from Yale University. You counted those correctly. He could use his Yale master's degrees as placemats for 4 children. He is the author of 5 books, including The Father of Lights, A Theology of Beauty, On Teaching Fairy Stories, and the Medieval History Textbook, The History of the Early Middle Ages. An engaging speaker and teacher, he is frequently a guest contributor to blogs and podcasts on faith and culture. He is co-host of the Classical Minds podcast and also a member of the Cultivating Project. Well, all of these things are true and can be found on Junius's bio on our website. I also want to add on a personal note that you are in for a real treat. I had the privilege of taking Junius's summer Latin intensive program, which was one of the most rigorous intellectual journeys of my life, and I also enjoyed his courses on medieval Latin and the theology of St. Bonaventure. Junius doesn't know this, but in 2023, I gave him a superlative among my friends that he still occupies to the present day, and that is that he is the sharpest intellectual that I have ever engaged with. And I think that you are really in for a treat with getting to know him better. I also realized for the first time actually during lunch that Junius spent perhaps more time than you should thinking through what medieval theological doctoral epithet he might have after he dies. There's the subtle doctor for Scotus, or the more than subtle doctor for Occam, or the seraphic doctor for Bonaventure. And so, Junius speaks on dragons and on fairy stories and is looking for something like Dr. Fantasticus or something really wonderful like that. But I would say you're speaking to us on fairies, so does that make you a fairy god doctor, given that you're also a theologian? I don't know. I would also like to thank our Renaissance sponsor, the St. Ambrose Center of the University of Dallas, for making this talk possible. As a Great Hearts headmaster, I cannot emphasize my gratitude to the University of Dallas for sending us top-flight graduates to serve the classical school movement as teachers and leaders. The St. Ambrose Center is dedicated to spreading a vision of classical education, culture, and lifelong learning in the Catholic and classical liberal arts traditions to K-12 schools, both public and private, as well as the wider community. The St. Ambrose Center supports K-12 schools through teacher professional development, school leader coaching, parent enrichment, curriculum resources, and consulting services for school culture and operations. They assist educators with forming students in wonder, faith, virtue, and wisdom. Just as St. Ambrose of Milan was teacher to the even greater St. Augustine, so too does the St. Ambrose Center seek to teach teachers and help them excel. I can testify as a school leader that they certainly live up to that calling. Junius will speak to us today on feasting in the land of Faërie, the role of enchantment in education. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our speaker, Dr. Junius Johnson.
Oh, I can't see you at all. You're all gone. That's fine. I'm just going to believe that you're there. And I can see those people over there. I'm going to talk to you guys the whole time. Hey, how's it going? I had dinner with the St. Ambrose people recently when I was in Dallas, and they are just a delightful bunch and really fun. So stop by their table and say hey and listen to them talk about stuff. Okay, I'm going to start talking about the nature of the human person, and the word I want to put out there is dream makers. And so I'll start with a parable. A certain man went to sleep of an evening, as he was wont to do. Well, not exactly as he was wont to do. You see, normally when he went to sleep, his head was filled with thoughts of the day just past, or occupied with the business to come tomorrow. But on this day, he had been reading a book just before bed. George MacDonald's Fantasties, if you want to know. The book had had a rather singular effect on him, clearing his head of the business of the day gone by and the day to come, and setting, if I may say it this way, the nerves of his imagination on edge. He was unsettled, though not in an unpleasant way. Not in a way he could name, indeed hardly even in any way he himself understood. He just knew that he felt queer and that sleep was a welcome next step. And so this man closed his eyes in his bedroom and opened them a moment later in what could best be described as fairyland. His first impression was of colors. His eyes were assaulted by a riot of color, strewn about with excessive abandon and little concern for verisimilitude. Tree trunks shimmered in bronze, silver, and gold, and their leafy canopies ranged from bright red to dark blue. Flowers sparkled on the ground like living jewels, a fine coating of dew reflecting back a sunlight that was so pure it was almost white. There was something nearly like stained glass in the appearance of that landscape, and it seemed to gather up all that light and reflect it at the man. He felt illuminated, but also exposed. He could feel, or imagine he felt, that light crisscrossing him in every color visible to man, probing the depths of his being, the empty spaces in his cells, the gaps in his soul. It was alive, this light, and it was examining him. A shadow suddenly fell upon the land, and a shiver ran through him, the icy finger of dread. Some dark, primal terror was coming, and the presentiment of it made his muscles ache and grow lax, such that he nearly fell to the ground. It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a radiant eruption that filled his soul with ecstasy. This, too, quickly passed as a gray fog rolled over the landscape. His heart became somber and still. And by the way, that's gray with an E, and somber spelled S-O-M-B-R-E. It's important that you get that image. Suddenly, something like a man was standing before him. We must say something like a man because he or she or it was hard to look at properly. The face and figure would not resolve, as if it belonged to a different order of physics than the human faculty of vision. When it spoke, the voice seemed to run up and down every frequency and timbre, never twice the same, and modulating even as it pronounced a word. What it said, or what he could understand of what it said, was this: "You have found your way to the land of dreams, which many have sought with all their strength and for all their lives. And yet you, who have never given thought to it and offer no service to its mysteries, have stumbled into it because you were reading a book that was too dangerous for you at a time when souls are especially vulnerable. And so I cannot bid you welcome here because you will find no welcome here. You must go." Well, the man was quite shaken by all of this, and being no great lover of danger, was of a mind to do as he was told. Still, it seemed an awfully singular thing to have found the land of dreams, and it would be a shame to waste such a chance. "Might I not see a little of the land before I go?" he asked. "What would you see?" the voice countered. "Some wonder or other that I could think about in an idle hour in the long years to come. Something that I could store in my heart to take out when the skies are gray," spelled with an A, "and life is dull, to remind me that such wonders exist." "Your first glimpse of this land would suffice for that, and you cannot be given more because you would misuse it. Wonder is not a thing to be shut up in the soul and brought out like a bauble to amuse your listless hours. To wonder, you are the bauble. You would have some blessing of us and avoid the danger, but we cannot protect you. Did you not feel the sudden changes that swept over the land but now?" "Yes," the man replied, "I marveled that this land is so changeable." "It is not the land that is changeable, but the heart of the one who walks it. You thought the world had become dangerous, and so you became afraid. But in reality, the world grew dark because you were afraid, and the light returned when you remembered joy. You thought you were responding to the world, but it was rather responding to you." Am I so powerful here then? That is not power. Power requires control, mastery. You are so influential. But influence over the world, apart from self-mastery, is the course of every evil. If you were to try to walk this land, you would break yourself to pieces on the reflection of your own interior disarray. No, you must go and come back only when you have better ordered your soul. Upon those words, the man awoke and found himself lying in his own bed. It was just a dream, he thought. And yet, the dream would not leave him. It would not let him alone. It plagued him over his breakfast and distracted him all day about his work. He found himself staring off into the distance over his afternoon tea and deeply lost in thought over his dinner. Indeed, it was not for that day only that the dream haunted him, but it left him changed ever after. Those who had known him before remarked how he, formerly such a steady, dependable man, had become rather distracted and disconnected. They used the word dreamer. He did not know it, nor had he consciously set about to bring it about, but he had entered on the path of becoming the type of person who ought to have had such an experience. For once the land of dreams lays hold of anyone, even by accident, it never lets them go. That's my parable. Now I want to talk about humans as exiles from the land of dreams, and I'll start with a quote from G.K. Chesterton. He says, "We have all read in scientific books, and indeed in all romances, the story of the man who has forgotten his name. This man walks about the streets and can see and appreciate everything, only he cannot remember who he is. Well, every man is that man in the story. Man has forgotten who he is." Since every pedagogy presupposes an anthropology, and the educator must be aware both of the nature of the student as well as what counts as good being for such a person, it is important when reflecting on the task of education to remember exactly who and what we are. And I will sum up our being in this way. We are exiles. Exiles are bound to the land of their citizenship, even while they are thrown into the land of their habitation. So long as they remember that they are exiles, they live but ill in the land. But if they forget that they are exiles, they have lost their home and become traitors to their hearts. If that is true, then it will not be enough to say that we are exiles. We must also say where it is that we have been exiled from. Let me suggest that the land from which we are exiled is the land of dreams. The daylight world, what we might call the waking world, or if we're feeling especially pejorative, the mundane or everyday world, is not our home. It is but the place of our sojourning. We belong to the land of dreams, and in our hearts we know that this is true. However much we adults may make peace with the daylight world and abjure our place of origin, we none of us ever stop longing for our enchanted home. Well, how did this come to be? It's kind of a weird state of affairs. It is founded on the truth that we locate our homes where our hearts are. And so even if the land of dreams is a place we have never visited, even if it is the kind of place we could not live, that does not prevent us from being citizens of it, from recognizing it as our home and organizing our lives and hopes around it. Every one of us knows the pain of a longing too large to fit within the tiny confines of our beings. In such moments, we confess that this world in which we live and move and have our being is too small for the type of being we are. Our destiny is so much greater than mortgages and taxes and laundry. If this is not so, if you do not believe that this is so, then you might as well give up classical education right now. Go on, I'll wait, walk out. No? You gotta stay? Okay. I don't know. Because classical education is an education for a life of more. But if you accept that humanity is more than just a rational animal, and that existence means more than just survival, then you have accepted that we are in some significant sense exiles. Now, because the truth of our being is that we are exiles, our hope is the hope of exiles, namely that our exile may end and we may get to go home. This is the goal of all human striving, to get back to the world we have never seen but know that we belong to. Our myths tell us that paradise is in our past because we know that we were made for it. Utopia is just the acceptance of the belief that what our hearts know to be true may also come to be true in the world outside of our hearts. That there may be a dream from which we find that we do not have to wake. This is why mythology and fantasy and fairy tales will never cease until the end of the world, because they express our deepest hope, because they are, in a sense, our most honest literature. And yet, the path of the exile does not lie entirely in his control. The most important part of it, that it is a journeying away from where one ought to and longs to be, is compelled. To have been exiled implies agency, and the agency specifically of another. No one goes into exile except those who have been sent into exile, and therefore the conditions of the end of the exile are not entirely within the control of the exiles. Our wanting alone will not be enough to bring us home, nor will our striving. This is as much as to say that the path from where we live to where we long to live is not straight. It twists and turns through many dark and dangerous places and leads over many a long and distant road and through many far-flung lands. This is the story of the Odyssey, and it is also the story of the mad flight of Jason and his Argonauts to the end of the world and back in an attempt to win their place in the world. Indeed, it is in some sense the story of every great epic, and this is why so many of the Greek epics are founded upon the notion of hospitality. So, if we want to find our way home, we will have to search out unused and unexpected paths. And to begin with, I recommend that we reflect on the nature of the homeland itself. The notion I'd like to bring to the discussion of the nature of the soul's home is the notion of Faërie. Faërie is a noun that refers to everything having to do with the fae, where the fae is the hyper-natural uncanny. Faërie is characterized by mystery, enchantment, and possibility. It is not supernatural, but rather the intensification of the natural. Fairies are not angels, but are the spirits of the ancient depths of things and places, embodiments of the power and mystery of nature. Because they represent and are the natural world, there will be both light and beauty, glory and rejoicing, but there will also be darkness and decay, stagnation and loss, because these things are part of the natural order of our current world. This darkness is not evil. It is the sickly sweetness of the rotting organic matter that gives life to the forest. And yet it is painful, it hurts, and it is exacerbated when it comes to those with wickedness in their hearts, who find that their inner darkness amplifies the outer one and populates it with horrors. And so that which may be, may come. In this realm, anything is possible. If you have known it in this world, you will find it intensified in that one. If you have longed for it in this world, you will likely find that this is because it is expressed in a lovely form there. If you have dreaded it in this world, you may be sure that it stalks the dark places of the Fae realm. Dreams are the overflow of the Fae into our world. They're what happens when the realm of possibility refuses to stay put in its prescribed borders or to respect the terms of its treaty with reason, and instead commandeers our subjectivity, taking our imaging powers for a joyride. In dreams, we make contact with the Fae. In daydreams, we do this willingly, inviting it in and making it at home. Have a cup of tea. At night, it comes to us, will we, nil we. The place where this contact happens is the human heart, which is the wisest part of a human being. And the younger the heart, the more prodigally the dreams flow. And we'll return to that shortly. But dreams are not just any part of fairyland. They are the parts we most long for and the parts we most dread. In short, they are the parts we most need. We need the objects of our longing because they interpret our hearts to us, showing us what we really value and desire. And they stir up our souls to pursue those things. We need the objects of our dread because these also interpret our hearts to us in different and more difficult ways. What we dread tells us about who we are, in part because our dreads are often the inverse of our longing, in part because dread is often a sort of prophetic vision of the place to which our lives are leading, and in part because we confess what we hate when we gaze upon what we dread. Thinking about that second thing, the prophetic vision, I was once counseling a student, and I was just saying, what do you want to do when you graduate? And she said, well, I'm not going to be a teacher. And I was like, that's interesting. You know what I've never said to God? Lord, please don't make me a garbage man. Now, I don't want to be a garbage man. I can't express how much I don't want to be a garbage man. But I've not felt any need to pray about that because I don't feel in danger of being called to be a garbage man. The stuff that I pray about not becoming is the stuff that I'm afraid God is actually calling me to do. That's what I mean about our dreads can sometimes be a prophecy where, oh no, I feel like I'm turning into a teacher. I don't want that. I think she's a teacher now. Thus, we ought not to flee even our nightmares. We ought rather to desire dreams, both the good and the bad. For without them, we will not only forget the land we belong to, we will also forget who we are. Authentic human existence, the kind that obeys both the Delphic know thyself and the Socratic readiness for death, requires that we remember that we are a people of dreams and that we cultivate that reality in ourselves. Okay. Next part of my talk is called Eternal Youth, the Secret Revealed. Now, I am going to have to ask you not to share this around, especially there are people that you know that, eternity in their presence would probably be your definition of hell. So please don't tell those folks what I'm about to tell you, because seriously, who needs those guys? Dreams especially flourish in the hearts of the young because young hearts are flexible and expansive, always ready to take in the new. They are slow to certainty and quick to wonder, and therefore they are quick to believe and easily impressed. To be slow to be impressed is a sign of sophistication. It is one of the greatest lies of adulthood that sophistication is good. We have somehow forgotten that sophistication is the goal of the sophist, who gives his name to this abusive way of relating to the world. Now, why is sophistication abusive? It's abusive because it assaults and denigrates the world. It considers things to be nothing other than what they seem to be, and in its hunger for that which is rare or outstanding in some way, it treats most things as common and beneath its notice. I struggle with sophistication in several areas, and one of them is as a musician. When I hear a musical performance, people are like, oh, it was amazing, it was great. And I'm like, it was all right. Bless their hearts. And that's not good, that's not better, right? Because I have a harder time enjoying decent and even good musical performances because I'm looking for the amazing musical performance. And so I cut myself out of a lot of lesser beauty. I'm struggling with it. I'd like to say I'm a recovering sophisticate, but I don't know that I've made enough progress to be recovering. I want to be a recovering sophisticate. How about that? This denigration, looking at things as common, beneath your notice, it's a denigration and an assault because it's a lie. There are no things that are beneath our notice, because existence itself, the very fact of existing, the power of being, is a wonder. And so everything, insofar as it exists, is wonderful. And the wonderful is always worthy of attention. So it is not youth as such that has this quality that I'm talking about, but specifically the young heart. And here is another great secret and power of humanity, just giving them away for free here, that the age of our heart is not linked or tied to our biological age. A young heart may just as easily and profitably reside in a 98-year-old breast as in a 98-day-old breast. This reveals a great mystery about our being. To be human, properly speaking, is to be young. It is why we so consistently idolize youth, why we normalize a time that is in so many and important ways deficient in our experience. Now, younger people out there, you don't get this. You're like, no, youth is great. Who wouldn't want youth? But you older people recognize that there's a couple of issues that you might want to deal with youth. Right? We've got a couple of provisos. The scandal of, no, that's not what I'm going to say. The reason why we idolize this time, even though we older folk know that it's got its problems, is because we remember deep down that we were meant to be young. That we are most truly who we are when we are young. The scandal of human existence in a world of brokenness is that we are young before we are wise. But the old and wise know that while youth with folly is nothing to be desired, youth with wisdom is a pearl beyond price. We are most ourselves when our young hearts are joined to our wizened minds. And yet, we are all familiar with the soul-crushing processes of the adult daylight world and the way that they add miles to our souls and age our hearts. How are these to be resisted, and more, to be undone? Wonder is the answer, because wonder is the fountain of youth for the heart. Wonder is expansive, and wonder has the ability to soften that which has hardened. Wonder is the exercise that keeps hearts young, and wonder is the therapy that can restore lost youth to hearts that have been overwhelmed by the demands of the world. This is because wonder is teleologically pointed at Faërie, and that realm is eternally young at heart. And I see this all the time in my teaching. A lot of my students are, they left school to start families, and they've been running their families, doing their jobs, doing their careers, and then they're coming back to study the theology of the imagination with me or something like that. And I can just see their hearts opening up again as we talk about this stuff. And sometimes they'll write me and say, I thought that this was gone. I thought that I would never have this again. And I feel like I'm back in college where everything's possible and all that sort of thing. So it is therefore demanded and urgent, if we are to be as truly human as it is possible to be, for us to be guided by wonder. But that this may be so, we must cultivate and guard wonder in our hearts. The cultivation of wonder, hey, that's the theme of the conference. The cultivation of wonder is required because only by the continual welling up of water from the spring do rivers not run dry. Anybody ever just wonder about that? The fact that, like, there's still a Nile River thousands of years on. Like, where's all that water coming from? Well, it's a cycle, but it's crazy, right? I mean, you would think that it would run out, but it doesn't. Wonder is the water of our souls, and we must be sure to drink our 8 cups a day. Cheers. The guarding of wonder is required because the heat of the sun of the everyday, as well as the many people who depend upon the spring for water, regularly make withdrawals from our store, right? Anybody got young kids? Yeah, just you? Come on, anybody else? Come on. Here. There we go. Anybody ever had young kids? There we go. There they are. Yay, another generation of humans. So you know this experience of that delightful, wonderful, amazing little human person is just, mom, and you're just like, please, can you just give mommy 5 minutes? Let's do 5 minutes of silence. How long was that? Right. that child is making a withdrawal from your store of wonder. And a lot of times, they're in the midst of some wonderful, wondering experience, and you're like, just go play in the other room, because you've been dried up, and you don't have what you need to come alongside them in that moment. Now, on top of that, it's not just everyday stuff, evaporating water from the spring, and it's not just people like the kids coming and taking buckets of water and spilling it all over the place. There's also enemies who would come in and take it for themselves. And as the livestock of mundane duties drink from the waters, they muddy them and threaten to dam up the flow. Some of you guys probably know this because you live closer to the land than I do, but I spent some time on a farm in college, and one of the things that they had to do every once in a while was move the lake, move the pond that the cows were drinking from, because the cows would go stand in the water and drink from it, and they'd track dirt into it, and they'd get it all muddied up. So in the meantime, you've been clearing out the old one, and the water builds up over there, and then you come and you clean this one out, and you keep going back and forth as the cows keep messing up the pond on which they depend for their water. Wonder is a sacred fountain, which does not mean that it can have no contact with the everyday, but it does mean that it must be protected lest the everyday sully it, or, more likely, lest wonder overwhelm and destroy the everyday with its own inherent potency and excellence. In the Hebrew scriptures, there's this moment when they're transporting the ark, and it tips and it's going to fall over, and Uzzah reaches out and grabs the ark to steady it, to keep it from falling to the ground. When he does that, the ark is not profaned. Rather, Uzzah dies. Right? We're so, don't profane the holy place. Holiness is not in danger from you. Okay, you're in danger from it. And while we might think that we prefer the death of the mundane, good riddance, Uzzah, this is folly. Our lives take place in the mundane, and we cannot live without a world. Further, the world is not mundane. The everyday is not everyday. The world is a miracle, and every everyday thing is a wonder. But if we do not observe the difference between wonders attended to as wonders and wonders whose wonder escapes our notice, which is what happens when we call something everyday, we will find that our ability to detect and be moved by wonder will diminish, and the sacred fountains will be overwhelmed with the mud of carelessness. So, if the cultivation and guarding of wonder is in general a human duty, then education which aims to create good humans, indeed to train and increase the humanity of its charges, must aim at the guarding and cultivating of wonder in the students, and at instilling the skill of guarding and cultivating wonder in them, so that they may take up the duty themselves when they have been fully formed. Education is above all concerned with wonder, displaying it, responding to it, admiring it, and protecting it. The well-equipped student is the student well endowed with a cornucopia of wonders. Erudition resides not in knowledge, but in bedazzlement. We can observe the truth of this proposition from the fruit of wonder in young hearts. It is wonder that gazes long enough at that which is familiar to recognize that it can be put to a very unfamiliar use. Right? You ever think about who the first person was to eat a snail? Who's walking through the garden and is like, oh, I want nuts in my mouth. But thank God he did, because escargot is delicious, right? Ooh, I can use mold to make medicine. What kind of a person thinks that up? Not the person who looks at mold and goes, ew, and immediately runs away from it, right? Seriously, they're amazing. You need to go get some more escargot. They're so good. It is wonder that looks along the well-trodden paths of human thinking, striving, and doing, and notices a little trail that may be nothing more than the path of some animal too small to follow. It is wonder that drives the human along this trail, leading them past thorns and nettles and over fallen trees to stumble upon a new land or a civilization long forgotten, and to bring their riches back to the common storehouses of the fellowship of wonder that is human culture. It is wonder that restores those stripped of its delight, that causes the one laid low upon the ground in grief so intense it seems like the apocalypse to rise up and try again. For only wonder has the power in that moment to offer what the grieving soul need most and yet has the most difficulty accepting: possibility. Perhaps it is the intellects of the young that will solve the problems of today and tomorrow, but they will not do so apart from wonder. They will not do so apart from having first been seized by wonder and without having abided in its precincts. And so wonder shapes the soul into what it is to be a good soul. Wonder empowers the human, now acting as human and not as insensate beast, to discover and unlock the paths of love. And wonder shapes the societies and cultures that are the flesh we put upon our dreams. I began our time talking about Faërie because it is a metaphor, a symbol, and a myth around which our true humanity is gathered. It is an astounding thing, this realm of Faërie, with its ability to sum up so much of who we are and who we wish to be. And therefore, it is to this land of Faërie that I direct your efforts. Dwell within its borders by means of the stories that have blown into our lands upon the Fae winds. Become wise by studying the things that have transpired there and the ways they have changed those from our world who have visited. Then, armed with this expertise, lead your students into the land of Faërie. Do this by means of fantastical and speculative literature that will allow them to dream big and unleash their imaginations in ways they are fundamentally wired to long to do. But also do this by means of realistic fiction and nonfiction and history and philosophy and the fine arts. Because the land of Faërie is the land of dreams and the home world of the human heart, there is no thing that may capture the attention of a human that is not touched in some way by the fairy graces. Show your students the Fae character of the objects of their study, and you will have no need of any further apology for them. Ever ask a child why they like unicorns or dragons? They'll look at you like you're insane. What kind of a question is that? Like, why do you like chocolate? Why do you like pleasure? What's that about? You don't have to explain it. These things don't need apologies. The land of Faërie lies open, and the feast is laid. It only awaits the feasters. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Junius. We'll go ahead and take some questions. As you were speaking, I was trying to think of what would be like a good icebreaker question as the moderator. And one thing that stuck with me so much is just the idea that sophistication is a bad thing and not a good thing. I was just sort of left to wonder how many students and potential scholars we have disenchanted, potentially, by overemphasizing truth and a desire for sophistication in a way that de-emphasizes beauty by being, in fact, repulsive. I think that there's a strong emphasis on sophistication in education in general, classical education, higher education, that really can alienate a lot of people. So the idea that instead to join a wizened mind with a young heart is the calling, I think is just a really helpful antidote. I was reminded as you were speaking about some things that G.K. Chesterton talks about our Heavenly Father being younger than we are, the fact that young children delight in repetition. I was also reminded of a time that I was walking through Scottsdale Prep doing a tour, and there was a student who had let's just say they had a behavior moment, and it seemed to derail the tour for a moment. And Jay Heiler was there, and he said this, it reminded him of a paradox of what we do at Great Hearts, where we spend so much time trying to help young students think like adults, and then we as adults need to take the time to think again like young students, and how difficult that is. Those were just some thoughts that I had as you were speaking. My question is about ecstasy. You mentioned it in the first couple of lines of the parable, and one of the things I've learned from you is ecstasis comes from Latin sto stare ste status, to stand outside yourself, to have an out-of-body experience, a self-emptying experience that is itself self-fulfilling. So I was trying to think of some smart way to ask about ecstasy and its role with wonder and fairy and those things. And then I was reminded that actually my favorite quality of you as a teacher is that you helped me ask the questions that I couldn't ask in a better way than I could ask them. And to me, that's just a hallmark of what it means to be Socratic. So I don't really know what my question is, but it's about ecstasy and why I feel like it's important. Can you speak on that?
No. Ecstasy is really, so it's funny that you say that, because I've been working on the theology of wonder lately, and so part of that is to give an account, a theological account of what wonder is, a theological definition. And I have settled upon the idea that wonder is a certain ecstasy of the soul. There are the intensification of emotions into great feelings are ecstasies. And so joy is the ecstasy of happiness, right? And wonder is the ecstasy of surprise. It's the response we have when we are faced with something that exceeds or lies outside of our previous expectations. And what makes an ecstasy so powerful as well as so salient is that it gathers up all of our being. And all of us, think about grief, right? In grief, your entire being is consumed. You don't want to eat. You're tired all the time. It's not just a feeling, and it's not just thoughts. That's what the ecstasies do. Because what the ecstasies are doing is they're gathering all of us up and lifting us out of what we understand ourselves to be and showing us different aspects of who we really are. And so I think in that way, wonder is something that is both, it is itself a sort of ecstasy. And wonder tends to be multiplicative. So once you start to wonder more and more. And maybe what happens in mystical ecstasy is it's a runaway wonder. You get going and it just goes and goes and goes and goes, and the next thing you know, it's like a pandemic and everyone's got it, right? That sort of a thing.
Questions from the audience?
Yes.
The microphone right there,
So I was thinking about the image of feasting in the land of fairies. And when I think about the Odyssey and Odysseus's engagements with Circe, all the way to modern film, something like Miyazaki's Spirited Away, and of course all of the fairy stories in between there, very often we see the image of food and the way in which perhaps humans give food to fairy, fae give food to humans, and the way that seems to tether things to different worlds. I'm wondering if you could perhaps speak more to that imagery and its metaphorical meanings.
Yeah. Do you guys know the rule of food in fairyland? Let's hear it. What do we do with food in fairyland?
Don't touch it.
Don't eat it. Right. That's the first rule of fairyland. No, it's not. The first rule of fairyland is you can't stay. And it's interesting, because why don't you eat the food in fairyland? Because if you eat the food in fairyland, you can't go home. But you also can't stay. And so if you eat the food in fairyland, what happens is you lose your home. Because food connects us to where we're from. We can't process everything. We can only process the right sorts of things to grow our vegetative existence. There was a story, it was actually in a video game, but it was very good writing. The idea was humanity had colonized another galaxy, and they had brought all of this plants and animals and things with them and taken it over there. But over time, the food was failing. It wasn't that it was ceasing to grow. It was that it was nourishing diminishing returns. It was as if what was 500 calories yesterday was only 499 calories today. And so a famine was coming about because we had plenty of food, but there wasn't enough food for the amount of nourishment that the food was providing. And what they came to realize was that the fundamental biochemistry of the other galaxy would not support human life. And that the biological organisms we had taken there were slowly changing into that new place and becoming incapable of sustaining our existence. That's an image of what the relationship between food and the one who eats it is. And so eating fairy food, you're trying to assimilate to a world that won't have you, that you're not well suited for, and it doesn't make it possible for you to cheat the system and stay in fairyland forever, and you don't have to go back and pay your mortgage. It just kills you, right? In Christina Rossetti's Goblin Market, one of the girls eats the food. It's a story of a previous girl who had eaten the food, and then she wouldn't eat anything else, and she died. And then one of the other girls eats the food, and she's starting to undergo the same fate, right? And then her sister's able to break the spell by the end, but she breaks it by food as well. So I think that's what we're getting at here is this fundamental sense of food is a way of understanding a good fit with our world. And fairyland is the homeland of our hearts, but not of our bodies. And that's also part of the tragedy of human existence, is that our hearts and our bodies belong in different places. And so it's possible to long for a world where both will be at home, but that would have to be a radically new type of body.
Next question.
Thank you so much. You talked about wonder as the water of our souls, a sacred fountain, and gave that great example of the cows muddying the waters, and alluded to real enemies that can muddy our waters of wonder. Besides day-to-day adult life, can you give some examples of other things, especially as educators, to look out for that are sinister or that might tarnish wonder, that are more active enemies of these waters that we're trying to cultivate in ourselves and our students?
Politicians, because they want to sell you a reduced world of either or, so that you hate their enemies and give them power, right? So that's an issue. Anything that causes you to be inattentive to the world around you, the things that clamor for your attention, that claim to be important, but that really aren't, right? Those things are enemies. People who want you, they're like well-meaning people in your life who want you to stop dreaming and put your feet on the ground. And they are enemies of your wonder. Now remember, they are not your enemy, they're enemies of your wonder, and so you don't kill them, but don't let them kill your wonder either, right? And then there is the teachers. Huge thing is the giving in to the belief that repetition renders something less wonderful. Because you're going to teach that class for the next 10 years or 20 years. And how do you keep loving it again, right? Repetition does not, children know this, right? Do it again, Daddy. Ah, cool. Do it again, Daddy. Okay. Do it again, Daddy. No, I'm done, right? Anthony alluded to this and said the Chesterton quote, the joy of seeing things done over and over again. So there are beliefs that are really lies about the world, that if you accept them, will become enemies of your wonder, and you've got to guard against those things too. When you're bored in your classroom, please retire or change jobs, or ask for a different class, or take professional development and have your wonder reinvigorated. Junius Johnson Academics, where wonder meets rigor.
Hello, thank you. So I was listening to a reading of St. John Henry Newman the other day, which actually troubled me as a lover of literature. And his critique was that when we read these stories, maybe we wonder about them and we have all of these feelings, but then we put down the book and it doesn't habituate the connection between feeling and action, which leads to like a lot of indecision, versus when we encounter real life situations that we're forced to act on because it's not fantasy, it habituates that like movement from feeling into action. And I was wondering if you think that wonder maybe is somehow the bridge between that, or if you would have an answer to that question.
I think I disagree with the Venerable Newman, because we don't only act in our bodies, we also act in our thoughts. The things that I choose to think about, that's making choices and that's taking action, and it does habituate my soul, right? I mean, you guys know, don't you, that if you get into negative patterns of thinking, it will habituate your soul to certain types of vice. And so I do think that thoughts and actions work on the soul in different ways, because body and soul are different types of things, or rather body and intellect are different types of things. But I wouldn't necessarily say that one is inherently more powerful than others. In certain temperaments, above all the melancholy temperament, often the thought life is more formative than the body life. So I think that, if we were to connect that to wonder, it's rather that the things that absorb us, the things to which we give our attention, those are the things that are going to shape us, whatever that mode of giving attention looks like, whether it's doing the thing or thinking about it all the time or whatever.
First, I just want to say thank you so much. I absolutely adored your talk. A lot of what you were talking about reminded me a lot of one of my favorite books, which is The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry.
S'il te plaît, donne-moi un mouton.
There's a quote in that book that says, "Grown-ups never understand anything by themselves." And I was wondering if you could speak to that quote and how that relates to wonder and furthermore to education as educators.
I mean, I think she knows the answer to this question already, doesn't she? She's just trying to make me say it. Yeah, grown-ups as grown-ups. That's to say, a grown-up, if the grown-up is taken as that weird animal, which is really not an animal but a monster, because a monster is something that is out of proportion with its nature and the way it ought to be, right? Grown-ups, in the sense of monsters, can't understand anything on their own, because they're not full people. Right? Full people are grown-ups who have not stopped being the child in order to be the grown-up. They've put away the things that are proper to childhood, and they've kept the other stuff. So some of the things that you find in childhood are proper to childhood, which means they belong there and nowhere else. Some of the things you find in childhood are proper to being human, and if you set those things aside when you grow up, that's not growing up. That's just getting weird, right? And so a lot of times the way it works is when you have kids, the kids begin to call back out of you. You start seeing the world anew through them, right? I would go on walks with my kids and every 5 steps, my daughter's got to stop to pick up another stick or a leaf or a rock or something like that, because it's the most amazing thing in the world, Daddy. And I've caught myself so frustrated because I thought we were going for a walk, which generally involves walking. That I've sometimes said, it's just a stick. And in that moment, I'm not only refusing to allow her to help me see the world well, I'm also actively trying to damage the way she sees the world, because it's not just a stick. Nothing is just anything. Every stick is cool. It doesn't matter that I've seen thousands of them, right? The first time rain, watch a baby the first time they see rain, and they're just like, what is happening right now? Like, this is so crazy. And we've seen rain, who knows how many thousands of times, it's raining outside. Oh, it's going to make getting to work harder. But you guys, water is falling from the sky. Like, that is ridiculous. That's clearly fairyland stuff, right? So I think that's what Le Petit Prince is trying to tell us.
We have time for one more question.
Our esteemed moderator, to a large extent, already stole my question. But I was too struck by your comments on sophistication, and I could not help but think about the Great Gatsby character, Emily Buchanan, who cynically declared herself to be sophisticated. And I thought, as you kept speaking, I thought that this cynicism that is the inevitable result of that kind of sophistication would lead to shamelessly steal your metaphor, a kind of dehydration of what it means to be human, to be without that water. Mm-hmm. One can understand if one does this in error, but this seems to be a self-inflicted wound.
Yeah.
Is it fair to call that sort of an attitude a sort of suicide, literally draining our own humanity out of ourselves for out of spite, I suppose? And how does one combat that kind of attitude?
Yeah. I don't know that I would call it suicide. I think I might rather call it unmaking. What we're doing is we're making our being less. It's an annihilation, but the annihilation is an asymptotic approach because we can't ever complete the project. And that's good news, because that means that no heart is so cynical and dehydrated that it can't be rehydrated, although quite extreme steps might be required to get you there. How do we get this? How do we fight it? Stop it. Quit, right? Quit it. Quit being cynical. When you catch yourself being cynical, chastise yourself and say, no, don't forget, it's a wonder. That it exists at all is amazing, and I can't give account for it. I can't explain why it exists, right? And we can say, well, God made it. Yeah, but why? Why did God want horses and not unicorns? I can't answer that question. And so however magical unicorns are, and they are so magical, you guys, horses are more magical because they're actually real, too, outside of our minds. Right? Human unicorns are real, but they're not real in the same way that horses are. So I think that it's a constant project of reorienting ourselves and holding ourselves to what we know to be true, which is holding ourselves to the fundamental beauty and truth and goodness of things. And also maybe to begin to recognize that beauty, truth, and goodness are not the whole story, they're just the beginning. Why did we stop at 3? But I'll leave you with that, to ponder that.
Great. Please join me in thanking Dr. Johns one more time.
Thank you all. Thank you.